Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday lunchtime. Welcome back to your preview show here on Pink Un Channels. We're live on X, on YouTube, on Facebook, previewing Norwich City's trip to the capital. They take on QPR tomorrow in hope of hopefully another win and more optimism and positivity, which is what we're all after. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by my colleague Sam Seaman. We're going to be live for about half an hour, 45 minutes or so. So get your questions, your comments in. What we'd really love to know at the start of the show, and what we're going to come on to probably first and foremost, is midfield. I want to know your midfield for tomorrow. Now Marcelino Nunez is fit and available to start. You've obviously got Emiliano Marcondes, who's playing the way he is, and it's Ben Slimani, who's offered a real physicality. I think we're all probably expecting Kenny McLean to be in there. So we're talking 2 from 3 potentially. We want to know a little bit about that. We'll speak about anything you want, really. So get those questions and comments in, and within reason, I should say that. And we'll do our best to get through them later on the show. Sam, how are you doing? This it always feels to me when you have a midweek game and then you go to a full week, it feels like it can drag a little bit. So probably gets to this stage, and I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to get sort of I don't know the right word, but a little bit sort of agitated, I guess. I want football back, and I don't know if that's the same for you, but these weeks feel long in the Championship where you don't have a midweek game.
Yeah, I'm the same really, and it feels even more weird because I feel like at the start of the season we've got used to this strange rhythm of it's either 2 weeks with no football and it's almost completely quiet, or it's game after game and you barely have time to remember which city you're going to end up in, the next day. So to have just a week feels like quite a strange one, especially when you've been used to the Championship for a while, which unfortunately, obviously, everyone of a Norwich City persuasion has done. So, yeah, it does always feel a bit strange to have the whole week. Oh, we did say there was going to be Wi-Fi issues actually off camera, and I think I've just had a couple, but hopefully I'm back now. Yeah, it did feel like it did feel quite weird, but yeah, now that we're towards the back end of it and we can talk about the football, it feels like it's almost crept up a little bit fast after you sort of prepare to be bored for such a long while. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the game now, and yeah, should be a pretty interesting one.
But look, if there's any week where a pause is not necessarily a bad thing, then it's a week where you score 10 goals at home and you dispatch two sides in Plymouth and Luton, and maybe get your season going again, which it feels like Norwich City have done. It's felt probably since that international break like a little bit of a reset, hasn't it, Sam? Particularly in the work that they've done and the way that they've played. It's felt a lot more familiar and I guess a lot closer to what we saw prior to the October break, which is obviously in between those breaks where they had that real downturn in form and a few draws, and obviously the injuries. It's felt like a little bit of a reset, hasn't it, coming into this November break? And I think, and obviously you guys are the Norwich fans watching, so let us know how you're feeling at the moment. But I think you can generally gauge that return in optimism and positivity. And to be fair, even on the back of 3 straight defeats, there was frustration, absolutely, but I think there was probably a recognition of where Norwich City were in terms of those injuries. So it's been a good week, or as good a week as any, maybe to sit and enjoy maybe what we've seen in the last 7 days and those 3 games coming back off the international break.
Yeah, agreed. There's definitely been a lot of time for people to watch back those highlights and sort of soak up those 2 victories. But yeah, as you said, it feels like the positivity is back. The mood is a lot better than it was going into the international break. And I think actually that was probably to be expected. I think everyone knew that it would be a little bit easier for Norwich coming out the other side of it. But what I'm impressed with is the fact that that it's been even better than I anticipated. I think everyone was looking at certain injuries and, Marcelino Nunez coming back, and Ben Slimani obviously in the last few weeks as well. And it did feel like, Angus Gunn as well, it did feel like things were going to get better, but I did wonder whether without Josh Sargent, they would actually be that much better. But it's been really encouraging to see those players who maybe would be in the starting lineup, but you wouldn't have as typically your star players, to see them performing and stepping up to the level where they can reproduce what Norwich were doing prior to that international break. I think probably, to be honest, the standard of the opposition has contributed a little bit as well. They maybe haven't had to beat the same levels of teams that they were early on in the season. But yeah, definitely a real positive vibe around Carrow Road, and it's been probably a timely reminder of how quickly things can change in football, and that's especially true when it comes to mood. And it's crazy how within a few days you can go from people talking about relegation to people talking about the playoffs and whether Norwich can be even in the promotion mix. So yeah, I think it's a reminder of how fickle we can all be. Every football fan and everyone attached to the sport. But right now, it feels like it's definitely going in the right direction, and there's not really any indication that it should stop anytime soon. So as long as they can produce another good away performance as they did against West Brom, I think that positive feeling will continue after QPR, and maybe it's getting ahead of ourselves when I've just outlined how quickly things can change. But yeah, it does feel very positive, and it feels like when you're at Carrow Road, it's a happy place again rather than maybe an anxious one.
Yes, and 2 games coming up now against QPR and Portsmouth, both away from home, but both against teams with the bottom and the second bottom in terms of home record in the Championship, the worst and the second worst. So I'm going to describe the next week or so as a week of opportunity, and we'll see just quite how much they can seize that opportunity. Kobe is with us. He says up the nodge, indeed, and then follows it up with any news on transfer. Can we get through Christmas first? That's kind of my wish, but let us know what you want to know, and we'll have some conversations about it. We'll probably touch upon a few things. We're going to talk about the contract situation that Johannes Torup outlined a little bit later on, Kate Gordon, that type of thing as well. But let's move on, Sam, I think, to the midfield debate. And I think after weeks of discussing how Norwich City would fill various holes and what players they would pull from wherever on the pitch to fill certain positions, it's nice to be able to have a conversation about genuine quality competition, which is what we're moving on to and looking at now with this midfield setup. We know Torup has, throughout his Norwich career so far, gone with the 4-3-3, so we're not expecting any drastic change in formation or whatnot. So it's all about, I guess, which 3 from 4 you want to put in that team, particularly now Marcelino Nunez, as he confirmed yesterday, is fit enough to start games. So they have obviously been playing with in the last game it was McLean, Marcondes, Slimani, wasn't it? That was the 3 that they went with. You've got, I guess, Jakob Sorensen we could throw in there, although I don't necessarily feel he really took his opportunity. So we're probably talking about McLean, Nunez, Marcondes and Slimani. We've got a couple of comments on this front. We want to know your 3 as well, be it for tomorrow's game, but maybe long term as well. Let's start with good old Jeffman, who we friend of the channel. I think we can say now. He said, good day, gents. I don't know why he's gone Australian, but there we go. Midfield tomorrow would be McLean, Nunez and Marcondes, would then bench and Nunez against Pompey to prepare for what feels like a real litmus test against Burnley. Will Grant, who does some good stuff for Norwich Youth, has commented as well. Good to see Will. It has to be Marcondes and McLean, Nunez as the starters with Slimani off the bench. Marcondes has been brilliant recently, but Slimani's presence could counteract QPR's physicality. So we've got a mix of answers there, which is quite almost like we planned it and we didn't. One going for Nunez and Marcondes, and one going for Marcondes and maybe Slimani off the bench. So I mean, how would you view it, Sam, in terms of this weekend? Because as we say, it's nice to have options. Yeah, if you're Johannes Torup, which 3 are you going with? I mean, he's already basically said it's going to be Kenny McLean, so we're talking about probably 2 positions there. And I guess probably underscoring this debate is Marcondes and how well he's done, because to be in a position where he's gone from a little bit of an emergency signing to someone who feels like one of the first names in the team sheet is reflective of the work that he's done in his opening month or 2 months or so at Norwich City.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, for me, it comes down to a choice between Slimani and Nunez. I think Marcondes is probably the second one to be in that midfield for me. I don't see much of a debate around that. And most people I've seen talking about it have gone for Marcondes as well. And yeah, from a position where he was coming in as a free agent and someone who you very much expected would be, it might be 7 or 8 appearances off the bench for Norwich and then go and find a club next summer. He's immediately become actually quite a key player for Norwich. And for someone who spent the second half of last season on loan at Hibernian, maybe hasn't had a consistent run of games for a few years now, to just come in and be playing Saturday, Tuesday, most weeks on a really high level, I think it's it's testament to his professionalism and obviously also to his quality. So yeah, I think he would be in there for me. And then long term, it feels like I think Nunez, to be honest, is the better player out of him and Slimani. And it was weird because the whole time he's been out injured, I've known in my head that he's a really good player and how important he is to Norwich. But then you actually saw him on the pitch and you're like, wow, yeah, I forgot just how good this guy is, the way that he just sort of struts his stuff on the pitch and looks so casual, but also you look at the numbers and he actually covers the most ground for Norwich. So gives them a lot in that midfield. So in the long term, it would be Nunez for me. But what a great option Slimane is to have if one of them falls out of form, or obviously if you want someone coming off the bench. However, this weekend I would probably go a little bit different. I think the fact that those players all have form and that they play together against Luton, the fact that they haven't had a midweek game, so Slimane, where maybe you'd normally have to consider rest for him, it looks like he probably could play these 2 games back to back. And also, I'm not a huge fan of changing a winning team unless there is somebody who's come off the bench and done an unbelievable job, which actually was pretty much the case with Slimane against Plymouth. But I don't think anyone really did that against Luton. It did feel like Nunez gave Norwich a little bit, but maybe didn't completely change the game. And given the stage of sort of recovery from his injury that he's at, I think it makes sense for a few reasons just for this game to keep Slimane in there. And although I would agree that I think Burnley is probably the game to get him back in that starting lineup and to have him in there for that one, it feels like it could be well suited to him in a game that probably will be based quite a lot on sort of possession and control of the game. I think actually I would use these 2 games against QPR and Portsmouth as opportunities to build up his minutes, to get him back used to the team. And this is a great thing about having a bit of depth rather than an injury crisis, is that you can actually afford to do that at the moment. So I'd stick with a winning team and go with McLean, Slimane and Marcondes, but any 3 options out of those 4 makes for a pretty good midfield. And to be honest, a good enough midfield to beat QPR. So I think Norwich have a good few options, and none of them really has much of a weakness. But what about you, Connor? Would you concur, or would you want to have Nunez straight back in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tempting, isn't it, when you have a player like Marcelino Nunez on the bench, knowing that he'll be absolutely chomping at the bit to get back in that team. I think he showed that in what was a pretty good cameo against Luton last weekend. Felt Norwich's probably level of performance increased in possession when he came onto the pitch. But I'm inclined with you. I think given it's a 3-game week, I think you've basically got an opportunity to start one in one game and start the other in the next game. We know Slimani himself has had fitness issues, and I think what he's done over the last week or so, and you speak about maybe his increase in performance, well, I think that's probably coincided with the fact that he's been asked to play in kind of shorter bursts now, and he knows that he can absolutely maximize what he wants to do and how he wants to play, knowing that if 60 minutes is all he has in the tank, then okay, Norwich can throw on Marcelino Nunez and no problem, and vice versa as well. So I think I'd probably keep it as it is for this weekend, and then maybe look to bring Nunez in at Portsmouth and just swap that around, and then you can obviously make a judgment ahead of Burnley next Sunday. So like you say, it's a really nice position to be in. I do think, and we'll go on to the game specifically, so I don't want to touch upon it too much, but it does feel like it's going to be a game where I think Norwich are going to be able to have the ball, and they are going to be able to dominate in terms of the game and impose their game on what they want on QPR, and then it's going to be about how good that possession can be. So that probably does feel like it's better suited to Nunez perhaps maybe than what Tuesday night will be, where maybe it's a little bit more blood and thunder and physicality and whatnot. So I think there probably is an argument. And look, this is the brilliant position that Norwich City are in now with these 4 quality options that they have. Is Torup can basically take a view on maybe which 2 options he feels are better suited to whichever game in question. Like you mentioned, I think next weekend against Burnley, I want Marcelino Nunez in there for the quality that he has, and obviously Slimani as well. I know that maybe there was a lot of criticism of his individual error last weekend, and I actually haven't watched it back. I think the issue is more a lack of movement from those around him rather than him. I think he gets a little bit stuck, and then he gets pressed quite cleverly. And I think it was Shane Duffy off the top of my head who doesn't quite make a movement for the ball. And there's another player who I can't remember at the moment who also didn't make that movement to support him. And that was more the issue rather than his ability to play out. And actually throughout that game last weekend, he was a pretty good ball progressor for Norwich in terms of getting them up the pitch. I think I'd be inclined to keep Slimani in from the start, but I think there is a really strong, as there always is with Marcelino Nunez, argument for him to to start and taking the conversation in a different direction. I mean, Jeffman's pointed this out. I was going to ask you about this, Sam, but his new haircut. I mean, you like a change of haircut every so often, so you're far better qualified than me to comment. But what do you make of it? I mean, if he can play with it, I guess it looks better, doesn't it, than maybe it does when you see him warm up at the side of the pitch.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan, to be honest. I think although as you mentioned with my hair, I have tried a few different things. I think Nacho would probably be better suited going a bit more steady like you. I think he's tried a few things that maybe haven't come off, and although you are willing to forgive him because of the footballing ability, I think it's just a bit too raw for me. It's a bit too extreme. It doesn't look like a mullet that's been carefully curated over a number of months. It feels like something that he's
feels
decided
impulsive,
to do.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. I was going to say he's probably got to the barber's, seen a picture of someone with a mullet and gone, yeah, I'll have that. But that sort of character is probably what produces his performances on the pitch. So you can't complain too much. But yeah, I've got to say, when he came onto the pitch, I was wondering, yeah, I'm not sure. Hopefully it doesn't last too long. But then, who am I to say? I had blue hair and a shaved head at one point. So, I've probably had worse hair days than Marcelino Nunez, and I'm definitely nowhere near as good a footballer. So, probably not in a position to criticise, to be honest.
Yeah, if the analysis is reduced to his haircut, then you've got a pretty good player there. I would suggest. Like, it's not my cup of tea, as you can tell, but who knows? Maybe one day I'll grow it out really long, and yeah, I know this is warmth mainly more than anything, rather than a fashion choice. But yeah, I accept the point. It's a very fair one. Let's move on then. Let's return to actual football, because no one wants to hear us speaking about fashion or haircuts for very long. As pointed out by Tom, we're not the best candidates to do that for a long period of time. I guess the other probably position that we're looking at, well, maybe two, I think, but one specifically for this weekend, I'm interested to get your take on maybe the left back position, because clearly the form that Jack Stacey's in, the way that they've unlocked that right side, as we said, this is sort of prefaced with the fact that they've had some illness in the camp this week, and so there may be issues that we don't know heading into tomorrow's game that may obviously come into the thinking, but we wouldn't expect Yannis Hoftorp to change that, providing there's no issues with either Jack Stacey or Emmanuel Forson. There's no reason to suggest there is. But the left side is interesting, because clearly with Callum Doyle moving into a centre-back role, which he's, I think we both agree, he's looked far more comfortable in there than he has at left-back. We also saw Callum Fisher play there last weekend, and clearly Torp wants one of the fullbacks to invert, at least one of the fullbacks to invert. We've seen enough of his teams play now to know that that's what he wants to do, but they probably did lose a little bit of left-footedness and a little bit of balance by having him in that role, and as a result, it probably, not nullified because that's the wrong term, but I think it probably reduced the impact that Borja Sainz was able to have in the game in open play, coupled with obviously the Luton defender doing a really, really good job on him defensively, as good as I think we've seen anyone do against him, albeit he still scored late on. So would you be tempted to bring Ben Crizene back into the lineup? Obviously, Jose Cordoba is fit enough to start as well, so I guess it gives you the option to push Doyle back across to left back if you really wanted to. How do you see him sort of juggling with that role? Because he's clearly a massive fan of Fisher, wants to have him in the team somewhere. Clearly a massive fan of Callum Doyle, clearly a massive fan of Jose Cordoba. I don't think he's going to be able to get all three in the team. So how do you think he's going to go in the left back position, Sam?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. And I think as much as we talk about the midfield debate, that's almost a trickier one for Torp at the moment, because for me, on form, that back four is undoubtedly the four best players he has available to play in that defence at the moment. But yeah, I agree that it doesn't really help Sainz in that role, much like we've talked about Forson and the fact that although maybe technically he's still got some work to do and he looks like he's adapting, tactically his inverted role has really given Jack Stacey the opportunity to exploit some space out wide. Is to say, you can have it the other way, where the fullback being inverted means there isn't as much space out wide for the winger, and it doesn't feel like Sainz has maybe had those defenders taken away from him. Like if you have a Crizene going outside you, or even a Callum Doyle, and I probably wouldn't have him there because, well, for the reason you mapped out in terms of his own form. But if you have a Crizene out there, I think everyone knows he's maybe not going to produce the numbers or the threat that Sainz would. But as a defender, it's so hard to just stick with Sainz as he runs inside and leave 15 yards for Cresene to do what he wants. And I think Norwich did miss that. I also think even if you're going with an inverted role, having a right footer there, it's just never something that's sat well with me. And I think it's a bit of an individual thing. I think a lot of people have different views on this, but for me, it's always felt unnatural. And even with a footballer as good as Kellen Fisher, the number of times you see him get the ball ahead of an opponent, even 5-10 yards ahead of an opponent, and have to cut back behind them and lose that ball progression because he's on his weaker foot, it doesn't really work especially well for me. But this is why Torup is paid a lot more than I am to make these decisions, because it's really difficult, because you really want Kellen Fisher to be in that team, but right now, especially with the midfield debate taken off the table after those players return from injury as well, there's not really anywhere you can fit him into the team apart from right back. And when Jack Stacey has got, I think, was it 4 assists in the last 3 games, it would be extremely harsh to then take him out of the team as well. So, yeah, I'm probably just listing all the reasons why it's such a difficult decision for Torup to make. I think on balance, he probably will stick with the same back four, because I think we've seen how important Kellen Fisher is to his system and how much he rates Kellen Fisher. If it was me, maybe right now I would be tempted to bring Cresene back in at left back. I think he's maybe been hard done by at times this season, because I actually think he's turned in a few good performances, and even in that Plymouth one, which actually was quite a quiet one when you consider how good his team were, he found a perfect cross for Ante Sienats and what should have been the goal to kick off that form, even though he did obviously eventually find it in that game. So yeah, maybe it would be Cresene for Fisher for me. And the reason why I would be okay with that from a Fisher point of view, because I do think he's in Norwich's best 11 and is a very talented player, is because I think they'll need him as an option in future. I don't think having Jack Stacey as that more raw, more direct option is necessarily going to work in every game. And I think they will want to go back to that inverted fullback at some point. So for me, it would be Cresene for Fisher. But I think in my head, it would be a situation where Fisher's probably going to get another opportunity, especially in the busy Christmas period over the next few games. So much like Nunez, in a sense, he's someone who I'd want to see in the 11 long term. But right now, it feels like with all the players in form and the tactical situation, he might be the one who it makes most sense to drop out. But again, I'll throw that one back to you, because my decision's only very marginal. So yeah, I'm open to be persuaded. What about you? What would you do?
Yeah, I don't really see, whilst you've got Jack Stacey on the right, but I'm just trying to put Torup's head on, not necessarily mine, but I don't see, whilst he's got Stacey in there, I'm not quite sure he'll put Cresene in there as well. I think that would maybe then mean you have 2 fullbacks that push quite high up, and we've seen him like to play with one that's inverted. So look, I could be completely wrong on that, by the way, but I think Cresene is much more of an athlete. He's much more of a one who wants to attack and join attacking phases and whatnot, and maybe hasn't. And this was a point that Torup made, showed that not ability, but maybe that he's not quite adapted yet to being able to play that inverted role effectively. I think he could in the long term for sure. So that probably leaves me with 2, really. I think he'll be quite tempted, because we know how much he rates Jose Cordoba. I think he'll be quite tempted to get him back into the team, and that would mean pushing Doyle back to left back, which, I know has been criticised a lot in terms of what it gives Norwich defensively, but equally I do feel you probably get more out of him from a possession sort of side of things, which we know Torup thinks highly of, and actually think in the next 2 games that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, albeit you do have to accept that you leave space in behind and you leave an opportunity for opponents to counter attack, and they're going to play 2 teams who I think are going to want to counter attack them. So there is a risk and reward element to that. Ultimately, I think he'll probably stick with Fisher for the reasons that we've discussed. I think he's been brilliant since he's come into the team. I think the fact that we're talking about him as a left back at such a young age, when we know he's right-footed, we know he's a right back, is quite something. And to be honest, I think in terms of Borja Sainz, it's interesting how they've tried to maybe slightly shift Marcondez's role, and when Sainz comes inside, Marcondez pushes wide, so you still get maybe a little bit of the width. So I think that's maybe how they'll try to play it. But I think in the short to mid-term, I think he'll be very, very keen and very, very quick to push Cordoba back in. But I'm with you. It's not my preference to have a right footer at left back. I don't think it's a viable long-term solution. But I think at this moment in time, those are the kind of two solutions that I can see him weighing up. If it was me personally, I think I'd probably just opt for Fisher at this moment in time, with maybe the Burnley game being the one that, because it will be tactical and because it will be possession based, maybe being the one that you throw Cordoba back in. So yeah, to be honest, would it upset me if he went any of the three ways that we've discussed? Not really. I'd be quite happy with any of them. And again, it's nice to be in this position where we're talking about this. Plenty of comments and questions coming in, so do keep them coming in as we go. What I did just want to mention, Sam, in passing, is obviously this weekend is the final one in which Norwich City players who are on 4 yellow cards run the risk of a yellow card suspension. So after this game, the threshold moves from 5 games for a suspension up to 10 games. Norwich City, obviously, Callum Fisher has served a yellow card suspension. So it was 4, but I think it's now 3. I'm just double checking whilst I'm speaking to make sure I get it absolutely right. But there are a few players who run the risk essentially of having a suspension, and yeah, there are 3 players that we're looking at primarily for this. Fisher, who leads the way on 5, and as we know, served that yellow card suspension against Plymouth, didn't he? So we're now looking at Callum Doyle, Kenny McLean, and Marcelino Nunez, all on 4 yellow cards. There was actually an interesting moment last weekend where Luton were on a breakaway, I think from an Norwich corner, and Kenny McLean had an opportunity to go and make a foul and to halt that attack. And it just sort of felt like across his mind, he thought, I don't want to be out again. And he kind of sort of let the attack progress. Fortunately, it came to nothing. But it was an interesting kind of insight maybe into where his mind is and the fact that it is in his subconscious somewhere. But I mean, the way that Norwich City play, the way that they are, I mean, maybe that would solve a lot of the left-back debates if Callum Doyle was to pick up a yellow card. Not that any of us want that, but it's a game that those 3 are going to have to get through, isn't it, Sam? And to be fair, I think Doyle and McLean have been on yellow cards for a prolonged period, Nunez as well. But to lose any of those players for Tuesday night's game against Portsmouth would be a massive blow for the reasons that we've discussed. Albeit now in midfield and at left back, they do have sort of cover if one of them, you know, God forbid 2 of them, but if one of them was unfortunate enough tomorrow to pick up that yellow card.
Yeah, I think the McLean one would be the big problem for me, because he is probably the least replaceable player out of those 3. And obviously we can talk about the qualities of each individual player and how good they are. But I think in terms of his profile, and we probably saw this during his last suspension, Norwich don't really have a player to replace him. And even if you look at, you know, the 3 options aside from him that we were just talking about in midfield, one of Marcondes, Nunez and Slimane is technically a pretty brilliant midfield, actually, by Championship standards. But it doesn't really have someone who's going to be covering the same ground as McLean with that level of physicality. And I think Nunez probably does get about the pitch to the same degree, and probably to an even greater one. But he doesn't really screen that defence in the same sort of way. And he isn't likely to be making the same sorts of tackles and winning the same sorts of aerial duels that McLean will. So actually, I think the McLean one would be quite damaging. Nunez and Doyle, for me, I think would be not great. And they would be, you know, either of them would be losing a pretty good player. But given the debates that we've just had, I think Norwich would be okay. The problem would be if, you know, say Slimane plays 80 minutes of the game and Nunez comes on for the last 10 and picks up a yellow card. Then you've got a Slimane who we know is maybe prone to injuries at the moment and doesn't usually play that number of minutes, then having to play a huge chunk against QPR and start against Portsmouth probably. So yeah, the Nunez situation probably depends on the context if he does get a yellow card. But the Doyle one, as good as he is, I think the debate that we've just had around the sort of left side of defence probably means that Norwich would be okay and they would be covered to an extent. And I'm sure none of those players will want to miss any games. But again, it's a situation where Norwich are in a good position in terms of that squad depth. And I'm sure that's a relief for Torup when in the last few weeks, I'm sure he was sort of biting his nails over the prospect of any of his players getting further yellow cards. And picking up suspensions. So yeah, something to watch out for. But the McLean one for me is the only one where I'd be really panicking from a Norwich perspective going into that Portsmouth game.
Yeah, I guess it might well depend on how much of them fancy a trip to Portsmouth, and maybe who doesn't. I jest, of course. Just a quick interlude before we go on to contracts. Obviously, it was the FA Cup third round draw this week. Norwich City were drawn at home against Brighton. Jeffman is asking for your one-word reaction. His will be chips, because he can't wait to sample the Barclay disappointed. Sausage rolls is 2 words, to be fair, so he's ruled himself out on those grounds. But I will go for meh, to be honest. Sam, what's your one-word reaction to that draw?
Home.
That was going to be my next point. Yeah. Thank God, is basically my rules for any cup draw that Norwich are in goes as follows. So home draw or somebody interesting away, and I don't think that would have been interesting enough to warrant an away trip. So at least it's at home. Norwich and Brighton Norwich have played Brighton more times than anybody in the FA Cup. I think it was 12 times off the top of my head, which is mega. So yeah, they seem to like each other in this competition, and it'll be an interesting test for Norwich City against the Premier League team, and obviously interesting to see how strong they go for it. Right, let's speak contracts, because this was something that Paddy put to Johannes Hoff-Torp yesterday. I've got a list of the players who are out of contract in the summer in front of me, so I'll work from the bottom and work my way up. So I'll list when they've got an option on them as well. So Archie Mayer, and there is a club option on him. Jayden Warner, Jonathan Tompkinson, who has an option. Tony Springett, Ashley Barnes, there's an option on him. Onel Hernandez, there's an option on him. Grant Hanley, Jakob Sørensen, there's obviously an option on him. Emi Marcondes, who we've just discussed, there's an option on him. I would imagine that will probably be getting taken up in pretty quick order, the way he's playing at the moment. Christian Fashnacht, and there's an option on him. And I guess maybe at the top of people's lists at the moment, Sam, is Angus Gunn. There's no option on him, from what we sort of gather and understand. There haven't really been any sort of negotiations or talks over a new deal. We're now in December. I'd go and sort of point people towards Mohamed Salah's quotes on his contract situation. If you're getting in December and there's not been an offer made, or there's not really been any concrete talks, I think if you're a player, you're probably beginning to think maybe that your future lies elsewhere. So we'll come on to Gunn specifically at the moment, but I thought Torp, I mean, you were there, was quite interesting yesterday in terms of what he said about those players out of contract generally.
Yeah, really interesting and quite open about the situation. He didn't really, it's quite easy as a manager in that situation to pretend that you'd love to keep everyone and say, well, unfortunately, not every deal can be agreed. But I thought he was quite open, and without saying these words, it felt like a bit of an admission that, yeah, there could well be a few players leaving. I found it interesting that he talked about statements, and although he didn't put a time frame on that, it did feel like maybe that was a hint at something happening before the summer, unless he was already thinking about, released retained lists coming out in probably 6-7 months. So, yeah, it does feel like something that's increasingly a part of discussions. And I think when you listed those names, it did feel like maybe a sign that there is going to be further big change coming. And it felt like there was a lot of that this summer. And you looked at that release list, and there were a few fairly big names going from there. But this
let me interject on that point then. Who would you keep from that list of play? Ask me if you want me to repeat it, I can. But what names are you sort of thinking? Let's have what you'd keep first.
What I would do, I've been pretty open about Angus Gunn and the fact that I think he's an investment that's worth making going forward. So I think Gunn would be in there for me. As far as the others, I think Hernandez is one where I'd be making a bit of a late decision, because he's shown signs, to be fair, that he can be effective in this Torp system. I mean, he's shown signs that he can be effective in most systems, to be honest. But obviously with the sort of injuries and the game time that could actually be lacking once Josh Sargent comes back, and then that striking option is taken off the table, and maybe Ante Cianats moves out wide again. So with Hernandez, providing obviously he doesn't find another club in January or agree a deal to move on in the summer, he would be one where if I was in charge, I'd maybe just give it a little bit more time and see the situation that he ends up in. I'd keep Gunn, but then I suppose Mayer is worth an extension given. I'm not sure. I think he qualifies as homegrown, which would be a bonus for them given the situation that they're in, and we know they're a little bit tight. So I think it's worth extending his contract by another 12 months. But yeah, apart from that, I can't see anyone who I'd be desperate to keep, and I can't see anyone who the club are probably desperate to keep out of that list, to be honest, unless there's anyone who you would keep who I've maybe missed.
No, I don't think so. I think we both agreed on Marcondes first and foremost. I would be.
Marcondes, yeah.
My
bad,
would,
yeah, definitely him.
I just sort of disregarded him because I thought we both sort of agreed on that. But I could see him signing probably something a little bit more long term than just an option being extended. If I'm honest, potentially relatively soonish. I mean it is an interesting one with Angus, isn't it? I think he's probably the only one that I would consider. I think you make a good point on Anel. Actually, I think there's an option there. Do you give him another 12 months? I know a lot of people who maybe have made their minds up and view things purely on output, but I think at this level he's proven it probably, to be fair, in the last few weeks. He can still cause a little bit of chaos, and look, that's not always good chaos, and it doesn't always result in output. And obviously there's a need, and look, he knows this more than anybody, that there is a need for him to improve that. If he can produce the level of quality that he did for that assist for Borja Sainz at the weekend, then he can really put himself in the conversation. But I still think he probably offers enough as a squad player, and look, he's not drastically expensive to Norwich. So I think there's probably a debate there, but again, it depends how you look at the overall picture. But I think in general, that's a list that, you know, contains high earners, which is probably where we're sort of looking at the Gunn situation through, which is where the debate is at the moment, because and I don't see Grant Hanley, for example, at the age he's at, getting a new contract. Ashley Barnes, likewise. I think Christian Fashnak, to be honest, probably pretty soonish, may well have left Norwich City and be taken out of that debate. Possibly Grant Hanley as well. Who knows? But yeah, Gunn's an interesting one, because he's not in this category where, for goalkeeper, 28 is like being 23 as an outfield player. I would say goalkeepers work basically 5 years behind where outfield players are, as a general rule of thumb. He's clearly quality for this level. We know that. He's proven that. His performances last season, I thought he was one of the best in the division. I don't think he's maybe started this season in that same run of form, and look, there's been injuries and whatnot that have contributed to that. But clearly there will be a debate, I'm sure, in Ben Napper's head as Norwich City. If they're in the Championship next season, it will be their 4th year. There's obviously going to be a need to cut the cloth as well about where he fits into that, and whether they feel they can get better for cheaper. And this is probably where the debate comes. You've got obviously Vicente Reyes at Cambridge on loan, who's a goalkeeper they have high hopes for as well. So look, if it was down to me, I think Angus Gunn, because of what he gives you from a connection perspective, from what he gives you from a narrative perspective, I think he's almost even though he's at Manchester City, he's almost an embodiment of Norwich City youth and academy and pushing players through. And I think he's a good goalkeeper more than anything else. And I think he's improved a lot at Norwich City. And there will be, if he's available and if the opportunity is there next month to begin those conversations, I know there'll be clubs in Scotland, overseas as well, that will be interested in having a conversation with him. So it's interesting that we're at this stage and no conversations have happened. If it was down to me, I think he's one that is an investment that you do go and put a few years behind and give yourself some solidity and consistency in that position. He's good enough with the ball at his feet. I think there's improvements to be made in terms of his general sort of command of his area, but I think that can come with experience and time as well. And I think for himself and his career, he probably needs a little bit of time at a club after what was, prior to last season, really a real spell where he hasn't been able to nail down anything since that first loan spell at Norwich City. So I would be inclined to keep him, but I guess we have to sort of flip that, Sam, and I guess go to the reasons as to why Norwich maybe are weighing up what they've got in terms of goalkeepers at the moment, because I think we've probably both agreed that he's the best goalkeeper that they have available to them at the moment. So we're probably left with cost, aren't we? That feels like probably, and maybe the quality point, if you want to throw that onto the table. But I don't know. Would you be confident that Norwich City can get a better goalkeeper than Angus Gunn for cheaper? Because I mean, he is a player who would be sort of, or has been described to us as as maybe being on Premier League wages, whatever Premier League wages are, because the definition differs to different people. So yeah, I mean, what would you throw into this debate? Because I think we're probably both agreed that if it was down to us and we were in that position, and we're not, and we don't know what the numbers are, and we don't know, etc. But if it was us, that we would be making efforts to try and secure his future. So why maybe do you think that isn't the case at this moment in time?
Yeah, it's a really tough one, and yeah, I think you're right about the need to cut cloth, and I'm sure they will be looking at options. And the fact is that goalkeepers probably don't need to be that expensive. I think Norwich could get definitely an acceptable Championship goalkeeper. You know, we're not talking somebody like a George Long, who, you know, I think we've spoken about the reasons why Norwich might have extended his contract, and obviously a solid personality behind the scenes. But I don't think getting someone cheaper than Angus Gunn would necessarily have to be someone who fans are sort of fed up of and are criticising every week, and who's making mistakes on a regular basis. I think they could get a pretty solid Championship goalkeeper for probably much cheaper than Angus Gunn, but I don't think they could get a better goalkeeper than him, full stop, to come and play in the Championship and come and play for Norwich. And that's where I think they have to maybe consider all of the positives that there are about Gunn. And it's not just his quality. It's, you know, as you mentioned, the homegrown status, the fact that he represents the commitment to the academy, and he's come through that academy. He obviously understands better than probably anyone else in that team for decades what Norwich City means, given, you know, the family connections, the fact that he grew up supporting the club and in, you know, watching games from the Carrow Road stands. And you aren't going to get somebody, for me, more well suited to this football club than Gunn, because it's not just those off the pitch things, it's also how he plays. And he has learned, you know, as you said, he's improved a lot, and one of those aspects is how he commands his area, how quickly he comes out. He's improved on that a lot. In possession, he's pretty good, he's pretty calm as well, and that's what you need in a tore-up system. So it does obviously come down to money, but I think maybe they're looking a bit too much at the value for money, and they're thinking, okay, we can sign somebody who's, you know, whose wages are half Gunn's and maybe is 3/4 as good as Gunn. But for me, you need that. They've got that quality in the building, and I don't think they're going to be able to recruit someone who has that same quality. And as much as rebuilding is good, and you know, I think everyone recognised Norwich needed to do that, it's impossible to just change an entire team within sort of 18 months. And I think you do need some players to stick around. And we also have to remember they probably will be saving quite a lot of money next summer. You know, we've spoken about Hanley, about Barnes. I mean, I don't expect Fastnacht is on a huge amount, but they'll also get his wages off the books as well. They will be in receipt of a lot of money they haven't had previously next summer. So for me, and as you said, we don't know the exact details of the financial situation, but I think, yeah, as we've both said, it's worth the investment. I don't think they're getting anybody better than Angus Gunn. And while they've got that quality in the building, and while they've got someone who suits what they want to do so perfectly, I think it would be a waste just to let him go somewhere else at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I would emphasise that point that you made in terms of there's going to be a lot of change. So within that change, you need some constants, and I think that actually that's not a position that they need to change at this stage. If we get 2 years down the line and look, they're in a position where they might want an upgrade, or they might want to go in a slightly different direction, or he hasn't proved value or whatever, then I think you can assess or reassess the situation. But it's clear from what Mark Attanasio said after the AGM, they're now in a position where they can make footballing decisions rather than financial decisions. So I'm sure if Ben Napper could make the case for Angus Gunn, then I'm sure he would be supported in that by those who obviously whose money it is, essentially. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops, but it's one that I think we would you'd hope would be resolved one way or another pretty soon, because you know, I think the last thing you want is this uncertainty being dragged out all season long. But clearly there you can't tell a player he's not going to get a contract in December, because what incentive do you give him to perform for the rest of the season? You don't. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but you would hope those conversations at least begin pretty soon, and maybe some clarity on that situation emerges. We did get one question which I want to go back to. Also, look, Galatasaray, I think, are being linked to a half of Norwich. To be fair, I saw that in Turkey this morning. It's very speculative. There's not a lot to it. I wouldn't worry about Jose Cordoba going anywhere for 4.5 million, if I'm completely honest. So, there we go, and Paddy Davitt, and all the good stuff. But it seems like Galatasaray's, I don't know if they've got like a scouting department set up in Norfolk at the moment, but it seems to be that way. We did get a question. I am just trying to find it in a moment. Here we go, from Tom, who said, hi boys, do you feel Norwich have no chance of extending the contract of Borja Sainz now, especially after talk of all the big clubs sniffing round? It's a good question. Obviously, Ben Napper said at the AGM that they were in conversations with his representatives about a potential extension. I guess my view is I think it could become pretty irrelevant pretty soon, if I'm honest. Hopefully not as soon as January. But equally, I think this is where maybe there needs to be some tempering of valuations that I've seen of a potential Borja Sainz outgoing, because I've seen people talking about north of 30 million. It's just not going to happen with his contractual situation for a player that's on the final 18 months and potentially the final 12 in the summer. I don't see a situation where a club is going to put down realistically probably more than what Norwich got for Gabriel Sara at this stage, if I'm being brutally honest. And that is where obviously, look, Norwich could say to Borja Sainz's representatives, look, sign a 3-4-year deal to help us out and get your value up, and we'll make it, I don't know, there could be a release clause or we'll shake hands or whatever if a certain caliber of club comes in. But I don't see why, if you're Borja Sainz, you would then agree to that, because clearly it's in his interest at the moment to have that contractual situation, because there will be teams looking at that, knowing that his value isn't going to be as high as it would be if he was on the type of contract that Norwich got Josh Sargent on, to be fair. And that long-term sort of contracts are the ones that provide value to clubs and insulate clubs. So in that regard, Norwich don't have all the cards on their table. I don't see, if I'm honest, Borja Sainz signing a new deal. I'm not really sure why he would at this stage, if I'm being completely honest. But I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing, Sam. But it feels like, my view has always been, I think Norwich, and this is an opinion rather than anything that I know, just to be absolutely clear, but I don't really see Sainz going in January unless they get stupid money. I think the message it would send out would be so negative that it's untrue, unless someone slaps down that 30 million that maybe we're talking about. I don't see that happening for a player that's going to get 12. And I almost think from Norwich's perspective, you'd be better off getting less money in the summer than getting more in January for what it would do in terms of messaging, in terms of their season at this moment in time, if that makes sense. Clearly, from a business perspective, that doesn't make sense though. So that would have to be weighed up. But yeah, what's your take on it, Sam? Do you see him signing and committing to Norwich? Because without promotion, that feels pretty unlikely to me, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I agree with you on basically all of the points that you made there. You speak to anyone, and the plan currently is not to sell him in January. They're quite affirmative on that whenever you speak to people behind the scenes. And obviously Atanasio and Napa were both pretty firm on that at the AGM. So yeah, I'd be surprised, especially given some of the messaging. But equally, as you said, what reason is there for Borja Sainz to sign a new contract at Norwich City at this point? For me, I think most of us would be of the opinion that he will be playing in a league that's better than the Championship next season, or at least a club that's bigger than Norwich, unless Norwich end up playing in the Premier League. And if you can't give him the sporting incentive, then the only thing Norwich can really do is put loads and loads of money on the table and say, we're not going to sell you in January, so you'll have to wait until summer to get the massive wages, or you can have loads and loads of money to stay here indefinitely on this big contract, and then hopefully we can sell you for a bit more money. But I think it would be quite a short-term decision, and probably his agents would inform him that would be a short-term decision to do that, just purely based on money. Because if we're being honest, whatever Norwich's biggest offer is for Borja Sainz, it's not going to be as big as the top clubs in La Liga or Premier League clubs, or even a Galatasaray. Norwich aren't going to be able to offer him the same sorts of wages as those clubs. So yeah, there's not really the financial incentive. There's not the sporting incentive. What reason does Sainz have to sign a new contract? And although I'm sure he's desperate to do well for Norwich, and obviously he'll want to win every game and keep scoring goals and probably add a few assists as well, ultimately you look at it from an individual career perspective, and it doesn't really make sense for him to sign a new contract. So although I'm sure Ben Napper is doing everything he can, and I suppose to an extent it's almost due diligence at this point, because you don't ask, you don't get. I'm sure he's going to continue to have those conversations as much as possible. But yeah, I don't see him signing a new contract anytime soon, unless, as you said, Norwich do get promoted, and then they've probably got half a chance.
Yes, and Norwich's model, as well as Ben Napper has reiterated, is about selling players and will be about selling players. And almost for him with the season that he's having at this moment in time, if you get to the summer and then keep him against his will, then you maybe run the risk of having an unhappy player. Look, I'm quite comfortable about January, because I think if he goes, it's because a club has put down a silly amount of money that is well and above maybe what he's being valued at by Norwich City at this moment in time. I personally don't see that happening. Famous last words, but at this stage, it doesn't feel like that is going to happen. I think the summer's far more likely, and would be better time for him and for Norwich, if I'm being honest. So yeah, it's one to watch with interest, but who knows? January windows are often about teams panicking and making very silly short-term decisions. So if someone wants to do that by putting 30 million on the table for him, then I guess they'd be more than welcome to, even with the challenges that maybe it would present Norwich. And obviously, then there's the flip side, that you just hope that we don't get a repeat of maybe what we had in the summer with behaviour and whatnot. And there's no indication that there would be. I think with Borja Sainz, who certainly looks like he's enjoying his football as much as we are all enjoying watching him, I think, this season. And I think it's been good to see kind of his shoulders get broader and his confidence grow, and maybe starting to add a few elements to his game. And I still think there's more to come as well, because at the moment it is just a good half season, and it probably needs to prove that it's something a bit more sustained than that if he wants a move to some of the clubs that are going to be looking at him. Right, let's turn our attentions then for the final 5 minutes or so onto the game tomorrow. Nice trip to the capital, nice trip to Loftus Road. I am going to moan why we couldn't be going to Portsmouth tomorrow and QPR on Tuesday. I don't know, but there we go. The same reason why Plymouth had to come here on a Tuesday and Bristol City on a Saturday, whilst Norwich had Luton on the Saturday and Plymouth on the Tuesday. Why they couldn't be flipped, who knows? But there we go. I don't know who's made the fixture computer, but we seem to be having sort of games in bulks, don't we? 2 home games, 2 away games. It's sort of lost a little bit of the home away element of the championship that maybe we've had in past years, but that's beside the point. What sort of game are you expecting tomorrow, Sam? Because I think QPR have had a very poor start and obviously find themselves in the bottom 3. But you look at some of their results in the last 8 games: a draw with Coventry, draw against Burnley, draw against Sunderland. They lost to Middlesbrough and Leeds, but I think so will most sides. Draw against Stoke. They beat Cardiff, and then they drew with Watford last week. Probably should have won that game, in truth, on the quality of their chance creation. They have had to solidify themselves a little bit after what was quite an expensive start to the season in terms of goals conceded. Feels like it's maybe going to be an afternoon of patience for Norwich City if they're to get the 3 points they want from Loftus Road tomorrow.
Yeah, it's almost a sad story when you look at QPR, because last season they had obviously Martí Cifuentes came in and actually did a really good job of not only improving their results and getting them out of the relegation zone, but also actually starting to build this style of play that actually was getting increasingly attractive, and they were dominating more games and looked like they enjoyed a bit of possession. But they've obviously tried to take that a step further in the summer and try to be really proactive going into this season. But as you said, that went pretty disastrously for them at the start, and they've now had to regress back to the sort of more direct and maybe defensive side that they probably were when Cifuentes came in. But it has given them a bit of a chance, and it feels like it's improved their results. So I'm sure they'd have taken that at the start of the season, and that's why Norwich are going to have one of those games. As you said, it's going to be about patience, about moving the team around, about doing things quickly. And actually, I watched a little bit of their game against Leeds, and when Leeds didn't have the pace and they didn't move the ball quickly enough, there wasn't the rotation. That was when they struggled to break QPR down. And actually, I thought QPR were quite good once they got into their block. They were good in their structure, and they were happy to sit there in front of a team and stop them playing through. But once Leeds actually played quicker and moved players around and did it with speed, that was when QPR actually struggle to react. And I think that's what it comes down to for Norwich again this weekend. The number of times we've spoken about, Norwich need to move the ball quickly, and I think it's becoming one of those lines that you hear from Torup in every press conference. But I think that's especially true against a team like QPR, who are pretty well structured and are pretty solid defensively, but Norwich have the players to unlock them if they can put it all together at once, and if they can show that chemistry that they've actually built over the last few games. So yeah, I still think it's an opportunity for Norwich, even though they're going away to a team who have produced some decent results against good teams in recent weeks. But yeah, you can't take it for granted whatsoever, even when you look at their league position, because as you said, those league results, I'm sure almost every team involved in those will be frustrated with their own performance and that result. So yeah, Norwich don't want to be added to that list. And that's why it probably will take a bit of patience and a bit of time just to get those moves to unlock what will be quite a stubborn defence.
Yes, indeed. I left a pause for dramatic effect there more than anything else. Yes, and it's interesting when you look at the record that they've had, which is 18 games, but only 7 defeats, 9 draws so far this season, which would suggest that maybe they've been competitive within games, but maybe just fallen the wrong side of the margins, as we discussed. Should have beaten Watford last weekend. So I think this might be slightly tough, but they've not won at home this season, and they've had a pretty poor home record at Loftus Road for a pretty sustained period now. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see how it unfolds. We've got a couple of messages on the game. Sadly, from Simon's perspective, afternoon guys, missing the game tomorrow with knee ligament damage. Missed the last 2 home games, and we scored 10 goals. I hope you get well soon, Simon, and I hope to see you. Hope you see you rest that knee up, and hopefully Norwich City will get even more goals to help ease the pain, or I don't know, add to it tomorrow. How do you see it going then, Sam? Let's have your score prediction. I'll obviously ask for it from the viewers as well, and we'll flash them up as you're talking. How do you see this game going? Can Norwich City get a 3rd consecutive Championship win in the capital tomorrow?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because they have been so good in these last few games, and since the international break, and going away to West Brom and getting a draw there with a pretty good performance suggests they should be able to do it on the road as well. But it always feels so different when it's not at Carrow Road to when it is, and for that reason, I don't see them scoring even 4 goals again, let alone 6. But I'm sure if they could get 1 and keep QPR out of the net, then they'd absolutely be delighted with that. But I think they might score 1 more than that, and I think they will struggle to stop that leaky defence from leaking anymore. So I think QPR will get 1. I think Norwich will get 2, and I'm saying another 3 points for Norwich, although maybe not as attractive as the last couple of games, and certainly not as easy. But I think it would be a big step if they could, produce that performance away at West Brom, get those 2 convincing home wins, and then manage to get a win on the road. I think that would mean, and we keep saying that Norwich are back and things, but that would mean it to an even greater extent if they could go and get an away win. So yeah, I'm going to say 2-1. It feels like it might be slightly optimistic. It always feels like going to Loftus Road is a tricky one. But I think Norwich's quality will shine through, and that they'll just about get a win. What about you, Connor? How confident are you feeling?
Yeah, not too bad actually. Not too bad. I think this is. I mean, to be fair, those sort of score predictions are very high scoring. A lot of those, which QPR haven't been this season. Although Jack's gone for a 1-0 win and Hernandez last minute. I mean, it's interesting what you say about Loftus Road. I think, and I've got some numbers in front of me. Norwich have, over the last decade or so, a quite good record there, actually. Not that we want to go down the Along Come Norwich route, but unbeaten across their last 4 away league games against QPR, while losing 2 of their last 10 trips, winning 4 of those and drawing 4 of those. And equally, obviously, QPR have failed to win any of their last 8 league games against Norwich, scoring more than 1 goal in just one of those matches, which was that April? Did that finish 2-2 or was it 1-1? I can't remember now.
No, it was 2-2. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So I think that was the only occasion. So, yeah, I'm intrigued. I think if Norwich play the football that we know that they can play, then I think they can win this game. with the caveat that we don't quite know the extent of whether the illness that has been in the camp is going to affect sort of team selections and whatnot. So I'm going to go for Norwich City to edge it. I'm going to go for a 2-1 win, which I think would be pretty mega. That seems like a good place to leave it. Pinkin.com will have all of the build up, all of the coverage tomorrow, and all of the analysis post game as well. I've got plenty of videos up on our YouTube channel, Sam's Tactics Board. We've got Terrace Talk, we've got Johannes Hoftorup's press conference. We've got obviously interviews with Hemi Marcondes and Liv Cook, who plays for Norwich's women's team. They've got a big FA Cup game this Sunday against Cheltenham. They're hoping to reach the 4th round for the first time since the 09-10 campaign. So a big weekend for them. I hope they go and beat Cheltenham, who are a league higher than them. So that's one to keep an eye out as well. We'll of course have coverage and whatnot of that game as well. But that seems like a nice place to leave it. Thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon. We'll see you all in the capital tomorrow. And thanks for watching.